Picture this, the year is 1470. In a palace chamber in Constantinople, a sword catches the morning light one final time before it hovers above a young woman's neck. Sister Maria kneels on polished marble white habit stark against the golden opulence surrounding her. Her hands are gripped by Ottoman guards. Her breath comes in shallow gasps. Her eyes are fixed on the blade. The man holding the sword, Commander Suleiman Bey, adorned in crimson and gold, turban wrapped in imperial silk, doesn't swing. He smiles. Because what he's about to do to her is far worse than a clean death. Outside the latticed windows, Constantinople thrives under Ottoman rule. The city that was once the heart of Christendom now pulses with a different rhythm. Church bells have been silenced. Minarets pierce the sky where crosses once stood. And in the palace halls, a new strategy is being perfected. Sister Maria expected martyrdom. She prayed for the strength to face the executioner's blade with dignity. What she received instead was something no prayer had prepared her for. Because what happened next wasn't written in any martyr's tale you've read. It was buried in Ottoman court records and diplomatic correspondence, hidden beneath centuries of silence, until archaeologists broke through a sealed wall in 2008 and found her name carved in stone. What the Ottomans did to this woman wasn't just conquest, it was something far more calculated, something that breaks not bodies but souls. The question isn't whether you can handle this story. It's whether you're willing to remember the woman who survived it. Before we go further into Maria's story, I need you to do something. Drop a comment right now and tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it? Because what you're about to hear was buried for 535 years. The Ottoman Empire wanted this story erased. Commander Suleiman Bey, the man you'll meet holding a sword above Maria's neck, spent years perfecting a system where people disappeared without anyone remembering their names. He was sophisticated, educated, spoke multiple languages. He didn't see himself as cruel. He saw himself as a civilizer bringing order to chaos. His method was elegant: don't create martyrs, create ghosts. Break people so quietly, so beautifully, that no one even notices they're gone. He thought he'd won. He thought Maria would disappear. But in 2008, archaeologists found her name carved in stone beneath Istanbul. And now her voice is reaching you, wherever you are, whatever time it is, because someone refused to let her vanish. If you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit subscribe. Every subscription is an act of resistance against erasure. It's you saying, I see you, Maria, I remember. Now let's go back to that palace chamber. Because what happens next will show you exactly why Suleiman wanted this story buried. And why we're going to make sure it never is again. To understand what happened to Sister Maria, you need to understand the machine that consumed her. 17 years earlier, in 1453, Constantinople had fallen. The jewel of Christendom, the city that had stood for over 1,000 years, gone in 53 days of cannon, fire, and blood. Sultan Mehmed II had stood in the nave of the Hagia Sophia and declared it a mosque, not because he needed another place of worship, but because he understood something most conquerors don't. You don't defeat a people by killing them, you defeat them by erasing who they were. By 1470, the Ottoman Empire had perfected this art. They didn't just conquer land, they conquered identity. Greek monasteries in Thrace, Serbian convents in the Balkans, Armenian churches in Anatolia. The pattern was always the same. Monks were forced to serve wine in taverns where they once preached sobriety. Priests scrubbed the stables of the very commanders who had burned their churches. It wasn't random cruelty. It was strategy. Break them publicly, humiliate them theatrically, and the communities watching would understand. Your faith cannot protect you, but Commander Suleiman Bey had refined the technique even further. He didn't just want broken clergy stumbling through marketplaces. He wanted beauty, ceremony. Something so elegant, so carefully orchestrated that people couldn't look away. He wanted his victories to be performances that would be whispered about in Christian homes for generations, planting seeds of doubt in every believer's heart. Sister Maria knew none of this when she woke that spring morning in 1470. The Convent of the Holy Resurrection sat in the hills 3 miles outside Trebizond, home to 15 women who had chosen lives of prayer over the chaos of a world at war. Maria had been one of them for 3 years. She had arrived at 18, hollow-eyed and grief-stricken, after fever had taken both her parents within a week of each other. The convent wasn't an escape, it was the only place that made sense anymore. A place where silence was sacred and routine was refuge. Her days followed the ancient rhythm. Matins at dawn, lauds at sunrise, work in the gardens tending herbs and vegetables, afternoons in the scriptorium copying manuscripts in careful Greek script. Sister Theodora, a former noblewoman who had taken vows after her husband died in battle, had become Maria's mentor. She was 45, sharp-minded, and unsentimental. "Faith is not a failing," she told Maria once while they worked side by side in the herb garden. "It is a choice you make every morning when you open your eyes. Some mornings it will feel like joy. Most mornings it will feel like work, but it is always a choice." Maria had clung to those words through 3 years of choosing. The convent had become her sanctuary, the only safe place she had known since childhood. That safety ended at dawn. The Ottoman forces didn't lay siege. They didn't need to. They simply arrived, 40 soldiers on horseback flowing up the hillside like a dark tide. There was no warning, no declaration, no offer of terms. Just the sound of hooves on stone and the metallic rattle of armor in the morning air. Sister Theodora stood at the chapel door as the soldiers dismounted. She was unarmed, dressed in her black habit, hands folded calmly at her waist. Maria watched from the dormitory window, frozen, as Theodora spoke words that would echo in her memory forever. "You may enter, but you will not enter easily." The soldier's sword moved so quickly Maria almost didn't see it. One stroke. Theodora crumpled to the ground, and the silence that followed was absolute. Commander Suleiman Bey stepped over her body without looking down. He moved through the convent methodically, evaluating. The older nuns he ignored. The middle-aged ones he dismissed with a gesture. But when he reached Maria, still standing at the dormitory window with tears streaming down her face, he stopped. He studied her for a long moment, then he smiled. Young enough to learn, old enough to remember, perfect. Maria and 3 other young nuns were pulled from their cells. The elders were left behind, forced to watch as their youngest were led away on foot, hands bound, toward an unknown fate. By noon, they had reached Trebizond's market square. The plaza was crowded with townspeople going about their daily business, merchants selling olives and cloth, children playing in the dust, old men arguing over backgammon boards. All of it stopped when the soldiers arrived. What happened next was theater in its purest form. Maria was brought to the center of the square and made to stand on a raised platform. Guards held her arms, and then, piece by piece, they removed her habit. The white wimple first, exposing her shorn hair. Then the black veil, the scapular, the tunic. Each item was handed to Suleiman Bey, who held it up for the crowd to see before dropping it into the dust. In its place they dressed her in Ottoman court attire. Silk the color of pomegranates, gold embroidery that caught the sunlight, a hijab of fine linen that covered her cropped hair. The fabric was beautiful, expensive, suffocating. Maria's hands shook so violently she couldn't have dressed herself if they'd asked. They didn't ask. When she was fully transformed, they placed her on a horse behind Suleiman and paraded her through the square. Slowly, deliberately. Greek Christian townspeople lined the streets, their faces a mixture of horror, pity, and something worse, relief. Relief that it wasn't them. Relief that someone else had been chosen. Maria's lips moved constantly, forming words no one could hear. Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy, Kyrie eleison. Over and over, a desperate prayer carved into the rhythm of the horse's steps. They rode through the city gates and up the hill to the governor's palace, a sprawling complex of white stone and red tiles overlooking the Black Sea. At the entrance, Suleiman dismounted and turned to face her, speaking in flawless Greek. "This is your new home, Maria. You will learn to be grateful." The doors closed behind her with a sound like a tomb sealing shut. The first ceremony happened the morning after her arrival. Maria was dragged from her chamber before dawn and brought to the palace courtyard, a vast open space surrounded by columned archways where the early light turned everything to gold. Already, a crowd had gathered. Ottoman officials in elaborate robes, foreign diplomats with calculating eyes, curious onlookers who had heard whispers of the Christian nun being reshaped into something new. The palace imam stood at the center, an elderly man with a white beard and eyes that held no malice, only certainty. He handed Maria a piece of parchment covered in Arabic script, flowing, elegant, utterly incomprehensible. Then he began to chant, and she was expected to repeat the sounds. She stumbled through the phonetics like a child learning to speak. Her tongue tripped over consonants that didn't exist in Greek. The words meant nothing to her. They were just sounds, empty vessels that the crowd poured meaning into. When she finished, they nodded approvingly. The imam placed his hand on her head in what might have been blessing or might have been ownership. This became her daily ritual. 5 times a day, she was brought to the courtyard and made to bow toward Mecca. 5 times a day, she recited prayers she didn't understand while crowds watched and whispered. The performance was always the same, but the audience rotated. One day it would be military commanders fresh from campaigns in Anatolia. The next, merchants from Venice or Genoa who would carry stories back to Christian ports. The message was always clear: look what becomes of those who resist. On the 12th day, Commander Suleiman added a new element to the theater. Maria knelt on the marble as usual, the morning sun warm on her covered head. But this time, Suleiman stepped forward with his curved sword drawn. The crowd fell silent. He raised the blade slowly, deliberately, until it hovered inches above her neck. The steel caught the light like a slash of silver fire. "Do you submit to the authority of the Sultan?" he asked in Turkish. She had learned this much of the language by now, enough to answer, enough to perform. "Yes," she whispered, the Turkish word foreign in her mouth. But in her mind, in the language no one could hear, she prayed, "Kyrie eleison, Christos anesti, Lord have mercy, Christ is risen." The sword didn't fall, it never would, that was the point. The threat was more useful than the execution. Suleiman lowered the blade and smiled, and the crowd exhaled as one. At night, alone in her chamber, Maria used a hairpin she'd stolen from a servant's tray to carve tiny crosses into the underside of her bed frame. Places no one would look. Evidence that she was still there, still herself, still choosing even when every choice had been taken from her. The wood splintered under the pressure, and sometimes her fingers bled, but she kept carving. One cross for every day of captivity. Proof that she was counting, proof that she remembered. By the 5th week, something changed. Her small, bare chamber was replaced with larger quarters. Carpets appeared on the floor, thick and soft. The narrow cot became a proper bed with silk sheets. Servants brought her meals on copper trays: lamb cooked with pomegranate, fresh bread, honey cakes, wine that tasted of distant vineyards. After each meal, they drew her a bath scented with rose oil and jasmine. Suleiman's strategy was elegant in its cruelty. He was making surrender comfortable, desirable even. The message was clear. Stop resisting, and this can be your life. Accept what you are becoming, and you will want for nothing. It was during this time that she met the other women. They appeared one evening in the common room reserved for the palace's converted Christians, a beautiful, terrible place where former nuns and priests' daughters sat in Ottoman dress, speaking Turkish with varying degrees of fluency. Some had been there for months, others for years. Anastasia found Maria immediately. She was perhaps 30, a Greek woman from Smyrna with dark eyes that had once held fire and now held only ash. She had been captured 5 years earlier, and whatever resistance she'd once possessed had been carefully, methodically extracted. "You're the new one," Anastasia said in Greek, her voice flat. "The nun from Trebizond." As she sat beside Maria uninvited. "I know what you're doing, the little crosses, the silent prayers. I did the same thing once." Maria's blood went cold. "I don't know what you've—" "Stop," Anastasia interrupted. "Stop carving your crosses. They will find them, and then you will learn what real punishment means. Not the theater in the courtyard, not the comfortable rooms. Real punishment. The kind that makes you beg for the sword to fall." Maria wanted to ask what had happened to her, what had turned this woman into an echo of herself. But Anastasia was already standing, already walking away. "We all think we're different," she called over her shoulder. "We all think our faith will save us. And then one day we wake up and realize we've been speaking Turkish in our dreams." By the 13th week, Maria's public duties expanded. She was assigned to serve at Ottoman court functions. Victory banquets where commanders celebrated campaigns against Christian kingdoms. Diplomatic receptions where foreign envoys signed trade agreements and military pacts. She would move through the halls in silk robes, pouring wine into golden cups, standing silent and beautiful in corners where visiting dignitaries could see her and understand. "Even their holy women bow to us now." A Venetian merchant was the one who broke her. Not with cruelty, but with kindness. During a reception, he passed close enough to whisper in Italian, the language of her childhood prayers, of the Latin Mass she had once known. "By heart, do you need help?" he breathed, his eyes darting to the guards. "My ship leaves in 3 days, I can hide you." Maria opened her mouth to answer and no sound came. Because there were guards everywhere. Because Suleiman was watching from across the room. Because she knew what happened to women who tried to escape. She had seen the scars on Anastasia's wrists. The merchant saw her silence and understood. He moved away without another word, and Maria stood there holding a wine pitcher with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. That night she didn't carve crosses. She didn't pray for rescue. Instead, she whispered a different prayer into the darkness. "Give me the strength to remain who I am." The formal conversion ceremony was announced in the 24th week, a grand public event in the palace's largest courtyard with hundreds in attendance. Maria understood what it meant. She would recite the Shahada, the Islamic declaration of faith, before witnesses. She would receive a new name. She would become officially what Suleiman had been trying to make her all along. She had a choice. Refuse and die quickly, forgotten within a week, or comply outwardly while resisting internally. Become a ghost who walks and talks and breathes but remains somehow untouched. She chose theater. On the day of the ceremony, they dressed her in crimson silk embroidered with gold thread. They placed jewelry around her neck and wrists, weight that felt like chains. They positioned her at the center of the courtyard where everyone could see. The imam spoke words in Arabic. She repeated them, phonetically perfect after months of practice. "Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulu Allah." The crowd erupted in approval. She was given a new name, Aish, beautiful and Ottoman, and nothing to do with the girl who had tended herbs in a convent garden. She accepted gifts from the Sultan's representative, more silk, more gold, symbols of her new life. She bowed deeply, gracefully, exactly as they had taught her. But in her mind, in the place where no performance could reach, she whispered the truth, Christus regnat, Christ reigns, this is theater, I am still Maria. Years later, a letter would be discovered in the archives of Venice, written by a diplomat who attended that ceremony. "I witnessed the conversion of a Christian nun today," he wrote. "She spoke all the correct words. She made all the correct gestures, but her eyes were somewhere else entirely, as if she had learned to place her soul somewhere they could not find it." He was right. Maria had learned something Suleiman never intended to teach her. That compliance and surrender are not the same thing, that you can perform submission while maintaining yourself in places deeper than any sword can reach. But the performance was exhausting, and it had only just begun. After 6 months of ceremonies and banquets and performances, Maria's usefulness expired like a candle burning down to nothing. The diplomats had seen her. The merchants had carried her story back to Christian ports. The message had been delivered. Resistance is futile, faith is malleable, even holy women can be remade. Suleiman no longer needed a showpiece. He needed servants. Maria was moved from her silk-draped chambers to the underground quarters beneath the palace's administrative wing. Down stone steps that spiraled into darkness, through tunnels that smelled of damp earth and lamp oil, to a warren of small rooms where the palace's invisible workforce slept and ate and disappeared into their duties. Her life became cleaning, scrubbing marble floors that stretched for miles, washing linens that would never be clean enough, cooking meals she would never taste. The work was endless, anonymous, suffocating. The other servants were a mix of slaves, captives, converted Christians, and born Muslims, people who had learned that survival meant keeping your head down and your mouth shut. Maria stopped speaking almost entirely. What was there to say? The performance was over. This was what came after the theater: silence, labor, erasure. Until one night, 3 months into her new life, she heard singing. Faint, barely audible over the sound of water dripping in the tunnels. Greek words formed into a melody she hadn't heard since the convent. Fuzz Hilarin, the ancient evening hymn. Maria followed the sound through passages she'd never explored, deeper into the labyrinth beneath the palace, until she found a door that shouldn't have been there. Behind it was a forgotten storage chamber, and inside that chamber were 4 women kneeling before a makeshift altar. They didn't scream when Maria entered. They simply turned, assessed her in the candlelight, and one of them, an older woman with silver hair and scars on her hands, gestured for her to close the door and kneel. The altar was assembled from broken pottery and scrap cloth. 3 stolen candles provided light. A chipped cup served as a chalice. It was pathetic and beautiful and holier than anything Maria had seen in the palace above. "My name is Anahit," the older woman whispered in Greek after the hymn ended. "Armenian." Captured in 1468, she gestured to the others. Katerina from Thessaloniki, Zoe from Corinth, Elena from a village that doesn't exist anymore. Each woman nodded in turn. "And you are?" "Well, it's Maria," she whispered, and saying her real name out loud felt like resurrection. "From Trebizond." Anahit smiled, and it was the saddest, most knowing smile Maria had ever seen. "Welcome to the church that doesn't exist." "Well, they had been meeting for years," Anahit explained. Weekly at first, then nightly as their numbers grew and shrank with the palace's rotating workforce. They whispered prayers from memory, held communion with stolen bread and water, kept vigil in the only way left to them. "We cannot leave," Anahit said, her voice steady as stone. "We cannot die, they won't grant us that mercy, so we endure, and in enduring we remain." Maria began attending the gatherings. First weekly, then every night, drawn back to that hidden chamber like a compass pointing toward true north. They would kneel in the darkness and speak the prayers their captors had tried to erase. They would sing hymns so quietly the sound barely disturbed the air. They would hold communion and remember that they were still who they had always been, despite everything. And then Maria began to carve. It started with a fragment of pottery sharp enough to scratch stone. She knelt by the wall one night after the others had left and carved 2 words and a date: Christus regnat. 1471, Christ reigns, present tense. Not past, not future, but now, here, even here. The next night she carved the names of the sisters from her convent: Theodora, who had died at the chapel door, Irene and Perpetua and Anna and all the others. Women the world would forget unless someone wrote them down, so Maria wrote them in stone. Then came psalms, fragments of scripture, messages to a future she would never see. Her fingers bled. The pottery shard dulled and had to be replaced. But she kept carving, night after night, covering the walls with prayers and names and declarations of a faith that refused to die. "If I write it in stone," she told Anahit one night, "I make it permanent. They can burn parchment." They can silence voices, but they cannot erase stone. Anahit watched her work and nodded. Then carve deep, child, carve so deep they'll need to tear down the walls to remove it. For 2 years, the hidden chapel survived. Then, in 1473, during a routine inspection of the underground storage areas, Ottoman guards discovered the chamber. The candles, the altar, the walls covered in Greek and Armenian prayers, the unmistakable evidence of prohibited worship. The women were separated immediately. No trial, no ceremony, no public spectacle this time, just bureaucratic efficiency. Each woman was assigned to a different household, dispersed across the empire where they could never find each other again. As guards dragged Maria toward the door, she broke free for one moment, lunged back toward the wall, and scratched one final message with her fingernails. I was here. I was Maria. Remember me. The Ottoman records contain a single notation from that year. Domestic servants relocated due to prohibited religious activity. No further action necessary. After that, Maria vanishes from history. No death record, no further mention. For 535 years, her story ends here, incomplete and forgotten. Suleiman Bey continued his career, rising through the Ottoman administration, accumulating wealth and titles, dying peacefully in his bed in 1494. The palace continued to function for centuries. The underground chambers became storage, then were sealed off, then forgotten entirely. Until 2008. Workers conducting a municipal restoration project beneath a former Ottoman administrative building broke through a sealed wall and found a small chamber with no official purpose in any architectural records. Inside, they discovered carved crosses and prayers in Greek, Latin, and Armenian. Names: Maria, Anahit, Katerina, Zoe, Elena. Dates: 1471–1473. The phrase Christus regnat repeated dozens of times across the walls. Fragments of candle wax. Pottery shards arranged like altar vessels. Scratches showing years of use. This wasn't a brief refuge but a sustained act of worship. DNA analysis of the candle wax traces showed Mediterranean European origin, consistent with Byzantine Christian communities. Linguistic analysis confirmed the Greek was educated, suggesting monastic training. Carbon dating placed everything firmly in the 15th century. And there, near the chamber entrance, barely visible after 5 centuries, were the words, I was here, I was Maria, remember me. The Ottoman Empire dissolved in 1922, 450 years of power gone, but the chapel remains, the prayers survive. Maria's name carved in stone outlasted the empire that tried to erase her. Suleiman Bey wanted to break her, remake her, make her disappear. Ottoman records list her as compliant. But the stone remembers.